The Roman builders. The Romans weren't content to just stay in their little city of Rome. The bigger the city got, the more land the Romans wanted. And the best way to get land was to take it from other towns and tribes. So the Romans attacked their neighbors and conquered them. The more land they conquered, the richer they got. Soon, Rome controlled the whole Italian peninsula. Now that Rome ruled all of Italy, the Romans needed to be able to travel easily from one end of the peninsula to the others, so they began to build roads. Most roads in the ancient world were rough, muddy tracks filled with holes and blocked by rocks and fallen trees. But the Romans built roads that were easy to travel on. First, they dug a wide ditch and filled the ditch with sand. Then they poured small stones on top of the sand. Next, they poured concrete over top of the stones. Finally, they laid wide, smooth paving stones on top of the concrete. Along the road, the Romans put up stone pillars and carved on them the distance between towns. A traveler on a Roman road could look at these milestones and know exactly how much farther he had to go. The Romans became famous for their beautiful roads. The most famous of all Roman roads was called the Appian Way. It led from Rome to several large Roman cities in Italy. The Appian Way can still be used today. Roman roads were so well built that they lasted for hundreds of years. Today, many roads in Italy still follow the tracks of the old Roman roads. The Romans were the first ancient people to use concrete. They discovered that if they mixed volcanic ash, water, and lime, the soupy mixture would dry as hard as stone. They used this concrete to cement large stones together into buildings and roads. The Romans built whole apartment buildings out of concrete. Some of these ancient apartment buildings were 5 stories high. One Roman writer tells the true story of an ox who escaped from his owner on market day and ran into an apartment building. It kept climbing up higher and higher and higher until it reached the top floor, and then it jumped out of a window. Unfortunately, some of the apartment buildings weren't very well built, and they collapsed, sometimes killing the people who lived inside. Others were slums without any water or toilets. Whole families lived in one room. They dumped their waste out the windows into the streets. As the Roman cities grew larger and larger, the people who lived in them needed more and more fresh water. So the Romans designed special channels for water called aqueducts. The aqueducts were like narrow stone bridges with water pipes that ran across the top of them. Through these aqueducts, the Romans could bring water into the cities from springs 30 miles away. The Romans needed water for drinking and cooking, but also for taking baths. Baths were very important to the ancient Romans. Most of them took a bath every day, but they didn't bathe in a bathtub like you do. Instead, they went to the public baths, which were more like swimming pools. People gathered at the public baths to get clean. They rubbed soap made from animal fat on their skin and then scraped themselves clean with special curved blades. Then they could swim in cold or hot water brought in by the aqueducts. Today, the ruins of Roman roads, buildings, baths, and aqueducts can still be found in the places where the Romans lived, even though they were built more than 2,000 years ago. The Roman Gladiators. Today we're going to read a story about a man who became a Roman gladiator, someone who fought with other men as a game. The man in the story, Servius, is imaginary, but there were thousands of men just like him in ancient Rome. Servius lived in a small village near the sea. He spent his days working with metal. He made plows and hoes for the farmers who lived near him, and fish hooks for the fishermen. He liked his work. At night he would sit with his friends around a fire and talk, sing songs, and tell stories. Servius was happy. One day, as Servius was heating the metal to make a new hoe, he heard a thundering noise. He looked up, wondering if it were about to rain. but the noise wasn't thunder. It was the sound of horses' hooves. Around the corner of the peaceful village rode a group of men with swords, shields, and spears. They wore helmets and red cloaks. "We are Romans," the biggest man shouted. "We claim this village for Rome. Now you must obey us." Servius looked around for a weapon, but all he could see was a hoe hanging on the wall. He grabbed it and swung it at the man, but he missed. 2 other Roman soldiers leaped from their horses and seized Servius from behind. "You are our prisoner," the big man said. "You'll return with us to Rome." They put Servius on a horse and made him ride with them for days and days down a broad, wide road of stone. Finally, Servius saw the wall of a city ahead. It was the highest wall he had ever seen. A man standing on another man's shoulders couldn't even see over it. The soldiers took him through a small gate in the city wall. When they came out the other side, Servius found himself in a narrow, crowded street full of people. Little wooden booths lined both sides of the street. Inside the booths, men and women were selling fruit, pieces of cooked meat, bread, cabbages, and carrots, and jugs of cheap wine. Children ran down the middle of the street, chasing a mangy dog. Women hung laundry out on wooden balconies above the street. He could hear babies crying, men shouting, women talking to each other, horses and donkeys neighing. He had never seen so many people in one place at the same time. Soon the street grew wider, and the houses grew bigger. Servius began to see green gardens, fountains, and houses made out of white marble. There were fewer people here, and they were dressed in fancier clothes. White togas with borders of red and blue. They were approaching the center of Rome. "Where are you taking me?" Servius asked one of the soldiers who rode beside him. "To the Gladiator school," the soldier said. "You're big and strong, and you have courage. You'll make a great fighter once the trainers at the school have taught you what to do." Servius felt his mouth grow dry with fright. He had heard about the notorious gladiators of Rome, fierce men who fought with each other and with wild animals, while a cheering crowd looked on. "But what if I don't want to be a gladiator?" he said. "You don't have any choice," the soldier answered. "You're our prisoner. Go to the gladiator school or be executed." They stopped at a high stone wall, and 2 Romans took Servius through the gate. Inside, a large courtyard was full of men training for their gladiator matches. At the center, a man wearing only a loincloth and a belt was trying to throw a fish net over his opponent. He brandished a 3-pointed spear in his other hand. The man who fought against him was waving a short sword and defending himself with a large, round shield. His helmet was covered with pictures of fish. "The man with the net is called a net fighter," one of the soldiers told Servius. "The other one is a fish man. The net fighter is trying to catch him in the net and stab him. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll learn how to be a net fighter." Servius's knees were shaking with terror. If this was just the training camp, what would it be like to fight a real gladiator fight in the arena? How could he ever survive? The Gladiator School. At the Gladiator School, Servius lived in a cell just like a prison cell. But he was taken out every day for gladiator training. First, he had to pass a test to see how fit he was. 2 trainers, big men with scars on their faces, wearing armor and carrying short, sharp swords, walked all around him. They poked him and squeezed his arms. Then they pointed to a post 100 feet away. "How quickly can you run to that post and back?" one asked. Servius scowled at the man. He didn't want to learn how to fight, but if he didn't, he would be killed. Finally, he turned around and ran to the post and back. "Very good," the trainer said. "Now let's see how you do for endurance." For the rest of the day, the 2 trainers forced Servius to run, jump, wrestle, and climb. By night he was covered with sweat and mud, and was so tired he could hardly drag himself back to his cell. But he had passed the test. The next day, Servius stood in the courtyard along with 5 other new prisoners. "You will be gladiators," one of the trainers shouted. "Repeat after me the oath of the gladiator. I undertake to be burnt by fire, to be bound in chains, to be beaten by rods, and to die by the sword. To be a gladiator is a wonderful privilege. You are indeed lucky." Servius swallowed nervously. He didn't feel lucky. But all around him the other prisoners were repeating the gladiator's oath, so he took the oath as well. The next thing he knew, they were being marched off to their first training exercise, swinging wooden swords at straw men propped up against the gladiator school wall. The trainers had once been gladiators. They taught Servius and the other new recruits sword-fighting moves. When Servius had learned the moves, he then fought against one of the other gladiator students. They both had wooden swords, so no one got killed. But Servius didn't parry quickly enough, and the other student's wooden sword crashed against his side. He was sore for days, but the trainers just laughed at him. "You'd better learn to be tough," one of them said. "We don't care if it hurts. Just keep fighting. You'll get hurt worse than that when you fight in the arena." In the arena. Servius's heart sank. He already knew that his first fight in the arena was only a week away. He was to be a secutor, a gladiator who chased net fighters around the arena. He had already practiced fighting with his real weapons and armor, a short, strong sword, a large shield, and a metal leg guard that covered his left leg. On his head he wore a round helmet with 2 tiny eye holes. He could barely see out of the helmet. How would he ever catch a net fighter? What if the net fighter caught him first? On the day of the fight, Servius was taken to the arena, a large bare space near the outer walls of Rome. Wooden seats had been built all around it. They were filled with men and women, and even children. All of them were cheering and shouting. They were enjoying this. Servius's trainer put his helmet on and tightened his armor. "Go get him," he said, and pushed Servius into the arena. The metal helmet was hot and tight. Servius felt like he could barely breathe. He turned his head and caught sight of his opponent, a net fighter, creeping towards him from the other side of the arena. The net fighter threw his net. Servius felt it strike against his shield. He advanced forward, waving his sword. The net fighter backed away. Suddenly he turned and began to run. "He's as frightened as I am," Servius thought. He started to chase the net fighter. His heavy armor slowed him down. The net fighter wasn't wearing armor. He was getting away. Suddenly the net fighter tripped and stumbled. Before he knew it, Servius was standing right over top of him. He could hardly believe it. He had won the match. He put his foot on the net fighter's chest and looked around him. The crowd was booing and making the thumbs down sign. Servius knew what that meant. They wanted him to kill his opponent. If the net fighter had been brave and bold, the crowd might have had pity on him and turned their thumbs up. Then Servius could show mercy and let the other man live. But he was supposed to do whatever the crowd said. Servius looked down. The net fighter knew what the thumbs down meant. He had closed his eyes. He thought he was about to die. Servius stepped back and put his sword back in its sheath. "Get up," he said. "I can't kill you. I am not an animal. I know that it would be wrong to kill a man for sport." The net fighter scrambled away from him, hardly able to believe his ears. The crowd was booing louder and louder. They wanted to see blood. But Servius turned around and walked back towards his trainer. He knew he would be punished. Maybe he would even be killed. But he knew now that he could not kill another man. The Romans were great, powerful people, but they were also bloodthirsty. They liked to see men hurt. They enjoyed seeing blood. Some of the historians who lived in Rome thought that this bloodthirstiness was wrong and evil. They wrote about men like Servius, who refused to kill their opponents in the arena. Some even killed themselves so that they would not be forced to kill other men. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote in a letter to a friend, "The show was even better to watch when this happened, because the men in the audience learned that it is more decent to die than to kill."